Poker Toe, how you feeling, Gail?
Oh, it's painful. It's
Yeah.
gonna take a long time. I just have to be careful not to do anything strenuous.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll be okay.
Not fun.
No, these things happen.
We had quite a few people fall in the country. We had one broken wrist. We had Stephen Tesney hurt his back and was bedridden for a couple days.
Yeah, you try to do things and then, there are unforeseen catastrophes in the, this was a very unforeseen, you can't really see a patch of ice.
Right.
I gotta move.
Surprised that there's class today, that you're all focused and can deal with a class. It's just amazing.
Indeed.
What a week you've had.
Oh, this has been the week from hell.
I've seen, and I've been with you all week in my head. Not that helps anything.
It didn't have to happen this way. And I hope they make changes. But I'm not that hopeful.
We just need to get rid of the renewable energy and everything will be fine.
Of course.
Yeah, those darn wind turbines. Yeah, and plus they kill the birds.
Yeah. I don't know. If you've been to Palm Springs, there's millions of those. They don't freeze.
Well, look, they're in the north too, and they don't have that problem. It's all a matter of winterizing, and didn't want to spend the money. Maybe.
So Nomi, what do you do? What do you do in Toronto when the temperature drops all the way down to 19?
My apartment is warm. I have a wonderful coat, good boots, the right socks. The insulation here is adapted.
Yeah.
I got an email from a friend of mine in Calgary, who's obviously in the same Arctic vortex as us. No problem whatsoever.
No, I mean, it's ridiculous. So I hope that they do the right maintenance so this doesn't happen again, but I'm not.
Well, unless the government tells them to do it, they won't do it.
Yeah.
There's only a problem, obviously, for the homeless in this weather.
People won't do it.
Yep, that's 100% it.
In Toronto, there's still some homeless sitting out in the cold.
In the pockets of the politicians, and they won't force them to do it.
So it makes you appreciate historically.
We're all suffering.
It makes you appreciate historically how this really was the reality of life for them. I mean, they didn't have heat. They didn't have, this was what they lived.
Right. Yeah, but it was.
But this kind of cold for this kind of period is a result of global warming.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's nuts.
Yes, we would have just taken our family in ancient times and moved south.
Yeah, really have to move south.
Right. I'm reading Michener's Alaska. I just started reading that. And he talks about as they begin to go across the Alaskan bridge and the experience they're having. And I'm thinking, gee, we kind of had that last week.
Blaming renewable energy, wind was a cheap shot. Because it was actually not true.
But a lot of people believe what they want to believe.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, the politicians lie. I mean, this is our way we do things. The politicians lie constantly.
Well, there's no politician equals lie. It doesn't matter which side of the perspective you're on. You've got to get reelected, and so you lie. That's Republicans, Democrats, everybody.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Joe Biden is a prolific liar.
Well, unfortunately, the bar is so low following his predecessor.
Yeah, no one can compare to that.
No. No.
Canada seems a lot more progressive in terms of renewable energy. Is that correct?
It depends where you go.
No,
Also
we're
in
doing
Canada.
very well in terms of renewable energy.
Yes, but there are provinces are holding on to their oil and gas desperately, right?
Right.
That's
The
their
state of
income.
Texas in the summer gets about or over 20% of its energy from wind power.
Yeah.
Pretty good. And coal has
Yeah.
dropped to below 20%.
Yeah, Alberta
It's-
is holding on to its oil and gas very
It's
hard.
all
Is that-
economics.
Is that where like Calgary is? That's why,
Alberta,
yeah.
Calgary.
I mean, you know, Calgary,
Edmonton, Calgary.
there's lots of flights because that's where we went when we did our trip
Yeah.
Yeah.
on the train.
Believe it
we
or
started
not,
there.
the
You can get there
increase in-
very easily from here because of the oil industry.
The increase in wind power in Texas was a result of initiatives taken by George W. Bush when he was governor.
Oh, I thought it was Rick Perry who was behind that.
Rick Perry had nothing to do with it. It was George W. Bush that gave a boost to wind power in Texas.
Huh.
Rick Perry's suffering.
Yeah,
Because he's
got
All
a
right.
$1 million house in Round Rock. It's a real problem.
Just go to Mexico for the weekend.
They were cold. Northern Mexico was very cold.
Okay, he has to quarantine now because he went to a Category 4 country.
So do his children.
Yeah.
Right.
He's a
Let him back into
dedicated
St.
father.
John's.
A dedicated father.
Well,
Oh,
I
yeah.
have to say
Oh,
that
yes.
we were one of the very lucky ones who lived near the J. And I don't know if it's because we're by the J, but we never lost power.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and we never lost water either. It just the pressure went way, way low, but we never lost it.
Oh, lucky Rona.
I know, but you know, Joyce Garfinkel was staying with someone near me, a block or two back, and I'm beginning to think does have to do with the J because all around us, like 3 or 4 blocks from us, people were out of power.
It has nothing to do with the J. It's just it's a matter of luck and yeah.
The J is not a hospital. Why would the J?
I don't know. I
It's
know
luck.
they used it as a warming center.
It's luck though, because I have a friend who's on the same circuit as a water treatment plant and they lost power for hours,
Yeah.
you know, days.
I'm a
No.
mile from the J. I lost power for a day and a half.
We had friends that we went to stay with who are on the same circuit as the Med Center, and they did not lose power.
Okay, that is sensible.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, yeah. It didn't make sense to me about the J, except that it seemed to be a block of houses that are straight back from us, from there, you know.
Don't know. It's hard
No,
to-
Those of us at Bel Air were also suffering in the sense of loss of power and or water, although we did get power from about midnight to 4 a.m. one day and then lost power again. Of course, the optimum time to be checking your email, etc.
Yes.
Yeah, but it warmed your
You know-
house for 4
Yeah, but-
hours at least.
You know, we have shelter, we had bottled water, we have food. All of us should be thinking about the folks who don't have that.
I know.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Amen.
Absolutely true.
I was
I
feeling
vote for
pretty
Joy.
guilty actually about having, I mean, I asked Suzanne Rickles if she wanted to come stay here. And then my daughter came and
Okay.
stayed,
Let's,
you know, anybody, so that we'd have I wouldn't feel like I could help somebody.
All right, I'm gonna bring everybody together
Okay,
and we're gonna get started. We're gonna go back beyond this week historically. All right. So we're looking now at the late 1800s, the 1880 to 1905 period of time. We're going to look at France and Russia primarily. If we have a little time, we'll get into Ulysses S. Grant as well, but and that's a debatable moment in terms of Jewish history. So the new burst of anti-Semitism in the late 1800s comes at a time of the Industrial Revolution, which is altering life for everybody. By this time, there's inexpensive machine-made products that are on the market, and they can be found in almost every country. Improvements in transportation connect even the most remote places of the world, so those products are being distributed in an easier way. So the cost of products and their distribution has changed the entire system. It changed more than the way goods were made and distributed, it also changed the way in which societies were organized. Many of the people left the countryside to find work in many factories that sprang up in the large cities. Changes also took place in terms of government. And so you have a movement from the suburbs and from the rural areas into the urban areas. In a sense, you're seeing almost the opposite happening. I was reading a number of reports, seeing that the opposite happening today as we become able to work more remotely, and you're seeing people move from the coast into places that are less populated. But the Industrial Revolution encouraged movement into urban areas. As with any major change, some people benefited from the various revolutions, while others lost everything. And those who suffered as a result became angry, and they looked for the proverbial scapegoat to blame for what is going on in their lives. And in Europe, some revived old stereotypes of the Jews as exploiters of the poor, and they were usurers who get rich from the financial misfortunes of others. They increasingly intertwined those stereotypes with the myth that Jews were an evil race bent on dominating the world. So you have a lot of people suffering. The first place they turn is to the old stereotypes. This combination proves to be a disaster for the Jews, not only in autocracies like Russia, but also, excuse me, in democracies like France. So let's turn to France first. In the late 1800s, the Jews were an incredibly small minority in France, 39 million people, 75,000 Jews, 1/4 of 1%, all right? And yet those who lived there fully participated in the life of the nation. When Germany annexes Alsace and Lorraine in 1871, about a third of the Jews living in those areas chose to relocate to other parts of France rather than remain in their homes and become German citizens. So that tells you there's something about France that is at least perceptually safer and better off for Jews. There were, however, a number of disquieting signs in the late 1800s that anti-Semitism was alive and well in France. 1886, a Frenchman named Drumont wrote a 2-volume collection of anti-Semitic rumors, myths, and insinuations in an attempt to prove that Jews were peculiar and, quote, so very different from all other human beings, unquote. In Drumont's view, Jewish peculiarity endangered France. He claimed that wherever Jews rose in power and wealth, the nation fell. With Drumont's book, well, Drumont's book was not the first anti-Semitic book. It was the first to become a bestseller. During its first year, more than 100,000 copies were sold. Okay. It was reprinted over 200 times in the next 25 years. And Drumont insisted that he was not opposed to Judaism, but only to the Semitic race. And so you have the race issue playing out once again. And with that, Martin, you've got square number 1. Do you have the reading number 1?
What is the exact meaning of the frenzied campaign organized by World Jewry to panic France, dishonor the French army, and in doing, put it in no condition to play a role in Europe? This campaign simply means that the totality of interests of which Jewry is composed has taken a position against France and finds it advantageous that France cease to be a great European power. It seems pointless to me in these articles, which are written from a philosophical and social point of view, to give myself over to the puerile indignation and vain declamations on this subject. If the circumstances were such that I was invested with an authority that would permit me to save my country, I would turn the big Jews and their accomplices over to a court-martial that would have them executed. But in the theoretical and speculative domains, I find it quite natural and logical that the Jews do what they do. To think otherwise would mean falling into the mania common among Frenchmen who find themselves so lovable that they imagine that the whole world should love them. The Jews formerly had a nationality. They lost it because of their divisions and their absolute lack of any instinct of hierarchy and order. Thanks to their genius as conspirators and traffickers, they reconstituted a money power that is formidable, not only through the force that money itself possesses, but because the Jews have diminished or destroyed the other powers so that only theirs remain, because they have modeled, fashioned, molded a society where money is the true master of all.
I'm sure you're all feeling the love. To further make his point, he also founded a newspaper. You have a much bigger audience this way, which repeatedly claimed that France was in the evil clutches of corrupt and unscrupulous Jews. Several of the articles in that newspaper were written by the Marquis de Mores, M-O-R-E-S, a wealthy anti-Semite who made three major points. One is that he focused on Jews as Christ killers, two, Jews as capitalists, and three, Jews as a separate race that has negative characteristics. Those were the three arguments that were continually put forward by this Marquis. Most Jews in France initially ignored the attacks because they believed it was best to remain silent. But one of the captains in the army by the name of Armand Meyer, one of the Jews that de Mores libeled, was so outraged by the accusations that he challenged the Marquis to a duel. By the way, that was very common in those days. I don't know if you're aware, Herzl was quite a dueler. He really enjoyed the process. Yeah. De Mores was a veteran of many such duels, and he accepted the challenge. This is 1892, and he kills Meyer in their confrontation. People throughout the community and the country are outraged and bombard the newspaper with complaints about the accusations and demand apologies for its libel of a respected army officer. Mores is charged with murder, but is later acquitted. Nonetheless, Drumont and de Mores issue a statement, quote, expressing regret at the death of such an honorable man. The funeral of Meyer, thousands attend. It's a major event in the community. The rabbi who conducted the service spoke of the army as a magnificent example of toleration. He saw the outpouring of sympathy for Meyer as an expression of the unifying force of French opinion in support of non-discrimination and decency. That's how he responds. Yet 2 years later, in 1894, a similar accusation would rock not only the French Jewish community, but also the French army and the government it served. Public opinion was changing. You probably know where I'm going here. Dreyfus, 1894, 2 years after the previous event, a French worker who was working in a German embassy in Paris discovers a document while she's cleaning. She immediately turns it over to the French military intelligence officers, and the document that they found was a memo that listed French military secrets that the author was willing to sell to Germany. After reading it, the officers concluded that the traitor had to be a member of the general staff of the army or to have access to its files and those of the Ministry of War. Through a process of elimination, they narrowed down their suspects to just a few officers. They then decided that the traitor was Captain Alfred Dreyfus, an official of the general staff and the first Jew to hold such a post. Today, if you look at the evidence, it was rather flimsy. Such a serious accusation against a man with an excellent military record and no apparent motive. As a child, Dreyfus had dreamed of becoming an officer in the French army and had worked his entire life to make that dream a reality. He wasn't particularly popular. I need to tell you this. Nonetheless, with his fellow officers, nonetheless, he earned regular promotions and had the support of his immediate superiors. He was widely considered, in terms of his reputation, a man who played by the rules, not someone who took chances or cut corners. He was also a wealthy man. And so it's unlikely that he would have sold military secrets for a profit. He didn't need the money. He was one of those, remember I mentioned that people living in Alsace had been living there when Germany annexed the land. He was one of the people who moved to France out of loyalty to the country. So the question becomes, why would such a man betray his country? November 1, 1894, Drumont's newspaper, becomes the first to publish the story denouncing Dreyfus as Judas. The paper also falsely claimed that Dreyfus had confessed to the crime and that the army had absolute proof of his guilt. Later that month, most people in France, by that point, were really convinced, including most Jews, by the way, initially, were convinced of Dreyfus's guilt. Yet by all accounts, the defense had put forward such a strong case at the trial that many began to think that Dreyfus would be acquitted. And then suddenly something happened. Two prominent men stepped forward with dramatic evidence, quote unquote, of Dreyfus's guilt. One was Hubert Henry. Hubert Henry was the intelligence officer who was heading the investigation. Towards the end of the trial, when the prosecution recalled Henry to the stand, he made a startling argument. A highly reliable secret informant had confirmed Dreyfus's guilt. Henry refuses to identify the informant or provide any information about him. To do so, he claims, would have endangered the informant and might lead to war with Germany. So I've got information for you. I can't give you its source. It's dangerous to the country. On the last day of the trial, General Mercier offered additional new evidence. He sent the judges a sealed dossier that pointed to Dreyfus as the spy. The defense attorney, despite the fact that he had a right to see all the information, was not allowed to see it. French law would have given him the opportunity to do so, but he was not permitted to see it. The judges chose to ignore the law because the general told them revealing the contents of the file could endanger French intelligence officers. And after reading that file and after hearing from Henry, the 7 judges unanimously found Dreyfus guilty of treason. He was sentenced to degradation and then deportation and imprisonment for life on Devil's Island off the coast of South America. Devil's Island is this small little treed community on an island where 60,000 were ultimately imprisoned and a total of 2,000 survived. Right? You didn't flee because the waves were so strong and it was shark-infested water. So nobody fled. That wasn't the opportunity. Even ships could rarely get through. Dreyfus was not silent during this time. He shouted over and over that they were degrading an innocent man. As he's brought for the degradation, a huge crowd gathers, and when they heard Dreyfus shouting, the crowd responds by saying, "Death to Dreyfus, death to the Jews." They clearly considered his religion or perhaps his race as a relevant factor in his guilt. So did the press. One reporter wrote, "I need no one to tell me why Dreyfus committed treason. That Dreyfus was capable of treason, I conclude from his race." So you have a clear understanding this is an inherent quality to Jews. It's not a matter of whether or not he's guilty or not is not relevant, but it's inherent within Jews. Soon as the trial ends, Dreyfus's family, particularly his brother Matthew, searched for evidence that would prove Alfred's innocence. Matthew, however, is reluctant to work too publicly, fearing that he might stir anti-Semitic feelings. He quickly learned that everything he and his family did was going to be misinterpreted. When he met with the public officials, he was accused of bribery. When he looked for new evidence, he was accused of looking for a patsy, someone to take the guilt away from Dreyfus. Early in 1896, 2 years later, Colonel Georges Picquart became head of the French military intelligence. He soon discovers that Germans are still receiving French military secrets, despite the fact that the accused traitor is thousands of miles away. He begins to investigate, and his suspicions soon focus on one man, Walsin Esterhazy, a French officer known as a gambler and a scam artist. And Picquart soon becomes convinced that Esterhazy is guilty. Matthew, again the brother of Alfred Dreyfus, sends Picquart a letter supporting those suspicions. And Gail, would you read us his letter, reading number 2?
Monsieur Minister, the sole basis for the accusation leveled against my unfortunate brother in 1894 is a letter unsigned with no date, establishing that confidential military documents were delivered to an agent of foreign power. I have the honor of informing you that the author of that piece is M. Count Walsin Esterhazy, Commandant of the Infantry, placed on inactive service because of temporary infirmities last spring. The handwriting of Commandant Walsin Esterhazy is identical to that of the piece. It will be simple for you, Monsieur Minister, to obtain handwriting of that officer. What is more, I am ready to show you where you can find letters from him of an incontestable authenticity and from a date prior to my brother's arrest. I cannot doubt, Monsieur Minister, that knowing the author of the treason for which my brother was condemned, that you will promptly do him justice. Please accept, Monsieur Minister, the homage of my profound respect, Matthew Dreyfus.
Okay. Picquart's superiors refused to accept the letter or any of the evidence. They did not want to admit they might have made a mistake. One is said to have asked, "What does it matter to you if a Jew stays on Devil's Island?" Still others claimed that if Esterhazy was guilty, that didn't mean that Dreyfus was innocent. And to keep Picquart quiet, they sent him off to a post in North Africa. Problem solved. But before he leaves, he writes a letter that spells out his reasons for why he believes Esterhazy was guilty. Many people believe this letter was leaked to a member of the parliament. As rumors about Esterhazy began to circulate, a number of people, what their response was, Jews found their patsy. They also whispered that they had paid Picquart to say Dreyfus was innocent. In the end, Picquart's superiors decided to stop the rumors by putting Esterhazy on trial. They believed that the case against him was so weak that there wasn't much risk in process, and they turned out to be right. On January 10th, 1898, his court-martial ended with a verdict of not guilty, and as he left the courthouse, he was greeted with cheers by large French crowds. 3 days after the trial, France's most famous novelist, Émile Zola, wrote a letter to the president of France. It was published in a newspaper under a headline, "I accuse." Zola accused the government and the army of conspiring to convict Dreyfus. He claimed that at the trial, powerful officials had covered up the truth. And that day, and when he made this article was published that day, 200,000 copies of it were published in Paris alone. The government responded by suing Zola for libel and creating a criminal case. He did not have sufficient evidence to support his charges and is found guilty. And rather than go to jail, he flees to England. Zola's accusations and the government's response pulled thousands of people into the controversy. Those who disagreed with Zola, the anti-Semites, all right, took to the streets and attacked Jewish businesses, Jewish synagogues, Jewish homes, including the Dreyfus residence. There were anti-Jewish riots in about 70 cities in France. The violence in the street troubled so many people on both sides of the issue, and some decided it was time to take a stand. They called for a new Dreyfus trial in the hope that it would settle the matter once and for all. The new investigator, the chief investigator, Louis Signet is how it's pronounced, C-U-I-G-N-E-T, quickly discovered, if you remember the name Hubert Henry, he was one of the people who showed up with that last minute evidence in the first trial. He discovered that Henry, who had testified, had forged evidence and lied to the court. Signet's finding became public and Henry is arrested. But before he could be questioned, Henry commits suicide and promptly becomes a folk hero. Thousands were convinced that the Jewish syndicate had murdered him. Esterhazy, realizing, flees to England and confesses. He confesses that that original memo that was found in the German embassy, that he had written it himself. Once again, many insisted the Jews had paid Esterhazy to say this. August of 1899, 5 years after the conviction, Dreyfus was retried, and to the surprise of virtually everybody, he's found guilty. Nonetheless, the day after the second conviction, he's pardoned. It's strange. The courts don't declare him innocent, and yet he's pardoned. He's not declared innocent until 1906, 12 years after his conviction, and at that point, he's reinstated as a captain. I would recommend, I say this somewhat, the book by a woman's name is Ruth Harris. She wrote a book called Dreyfus. There's many books on the market, but you will have to skim through this. The level of detail in here is unbelievable, but you will come away a lot more knowledgeable about the situation as well. It's a worthy read. You just skim a little bit when you get to some of the details, would be my suggestion. Ruth Harris is the author. From this event, you may be aware there's certain other things that occurred. 1894, Theodor Herzl, then a reporter for an Austrian newspaper, covered the ceremony in which Dreyfus was degraded. Although Herzl had recognized the power of anti-Semitism long before the Dreyfus affair, this event strengthened his views. And in 1896, Nomi, would you do reading number 3? This is Herzl.
Need to unmute first. The Jewish question still exists. It would be foolish to deny it. It exists wherever Jews live in perceptible numbers. Where it does not yet exist, it will be brought by Jews in the course of their migrations. We naturally move to those places where we are not persecuted, and there our presence soon produces persecution. This is true in every country, and will remain true even in those most highly civilized. France itself is no exception, till the Jewish question finds a solution on a political basis.
Okay. Herzl proposes a solution, the establishment of a Jewish state. He believes that Jews must have their own country. That's another course, not going there. Plenty of books, plenty of opportunity. And on this topic, I'm sure there's a lot of knowledge sitting in this room. So I want to stop and open the floor to comments or thoughts. Wow, we silenced the group. Okay. All right, we're going to shift our attention at this point to Russia and Eastern Europe. 1772, Russia joins Austria and Prussia in a takeover of Poland and the first division of its land and people. There are two more partitions that will follow. By a curious turn of destiny, Russia gained nearly 1 million Jewish subjects and becomes governor of the largest Jewish body in the world. The Eastern Orthodox, or the Byzantine Church, was Russia's official church, and as defenders of the Orthodox faith, the czars of Russia did not want to open their country to the Jews. In the end, however, the czar decides that the Jews could remain in the former Polish parts of the country, all right, but they could not settle or work in the heart of Russia. The area to which the Jews were confined was known as the Pale of Settlement, and I think there's a map in the notes I gave you that gives you sort of an outline of what that looks like. An area in the Pale of Settlement, Jews made up 9% of the population. That is significant. Okay. We'll begin with the reign of the relatively liberal-minded Alexander the First. He rules from 1801 to 1825. And during this time, we see somewhat of a benign effort to wean Jews from their occupations as middlemen, as moneylenders, to agriculture and the handicrafts, and to break the hold of the rabbinate that is controlling the Kahals. All right? Tries to break their communities up. After Napoleon's defeat, however, Alexander changed his thinking, and Alexander changed his policies, and he drives the Jews further into the Pale. With his successor, Nicholas I, he rules for the next 30 years, from 1825 to 1855. Jewish history under the czars reaches its nadir. This is as bad as it gets. This tyrannical xenophobe introduces hundreds of disabling laws to curb Jewish participation in activities. And in 1827, he establishes the infamous military conscription of Jewish youths at the age of 12, extending their service to as long as 25 years. According to a memo to his generals, the Tsar writes, the chief benefit to be derived from the drafting of Jews is the certainty that it will move them most effectively to change their religion. These youngsters were transported to the furthest outpost of the empire and were tortured in an attempt to get them to abandon their faith. Many did convert, many others held out. This is where you start to see Jewish politics at its worst within its internal community. Jewish parents obviously tried to desperately keep their sons from being drafted. Wealthy Jews were allowed to purchase substitutes in place of their own children. And where do the substitutes come from? Many cases, the poorest of the families. Each Jewish community needs to provide a quota of 12-year-old recruits. And if the community cannot reach its quota, boys as young as 8 or 10 would then be forced into the army to make up the required numbers. The Jewish community leaders established catchers who went about abducting young Jews who happened to be on the street and may have not had the right connections without passports in order to fill their quota. You can only imagine the politics, the internal politics that are going on. If you think the Kahal was affected by Nicholas, this probably destroyed all leadership within the Jewish community. By 1855, the year that Nicholas I dies, many Russians were calling for economic and political reform. Alexander II, the new Tsar, announces plans to modernize Russia and to provide education, equal justice, tolerance and humaneness for every citizen. Almost immediately, he relaxes censorship laws and eases restrictions on foreign travel. Universities become open to students from all parts of Russian society, the poor as well as the rich. Alexander reduces the length of military service from 25 to 6 years, even less for those who are attending high school or college. And he abolishes the military preparation program for young Jewish boys as well. This time marked a significant step forward, less so for Jews than for others. For even though many Jews still hoped that he would eventually expand their rights, Alexander privately told officials that he expected Jews to earn their civil rights through moral improvement, meaning conversion to the Russian Orthodox Church. To his surprise, some Russians disagreed. There was an editorial in a newspaper published by the Minister of War, which declared, "Let us be worthy of our age. Let us abandon this childish habit of presenting the Jews in our literary works as ridiculous and disreputable creatures. On the contrary, remembering the causes that brought them to such a state, let us offer them a place among us. Let us use their energy, their readiness of wit and skill as a new means for satisfying the growing needs of our people." Such statements reflected a belief that Jews would make a positive contribution to the Russian society if they were allowed more freedom. And in the 1860s, a new law opened the Russian state school system to Jewish students, and the small government-run schools, particularly for Jews alone, gradually disappeared. Young Jews, like their non-Jewish neighbors, were attracted to these state schools because graduates would then become eligible for government employment, as well as a variety of commercial and professional careers in the heart of Russia. Years go by, and Alexander becomes disillusioned. He's disillusioned with the progress of Jewish politics, and he's resentful of Jewish involvement in the liberal movements which he fears within his society. Investigations begin anew, and a few Jewish schools are closed and restrictions are revoked, including a ban on Jewish advancement in the military and local government. Throughout the 1870s, Jew anti-Semitism intensifies. Many Russians believed that Jews were becoming too powerful and had too many privileges. Articles in Russian newspapers reinforced that view by warning of the dangers that Jews pose to Russia. We're hearing the echoes of France as well. They claim that the presence of Jewish students in the state schools would lead to Jewish domination of such professions as law, engineering, medicine, and architecture, occupations that had once been open only to the Russians. Other publications held Jews responsible for the revolutionary movement that was rising in Russia, as well as the evils associated with both socialism and capitalism. Jews who tried to use facts and logic to counter these arguments were ignored. One writer provided statistics showing that non-Jews living in the Pale of Settlement were better off economically than those non-Jews who lived outside the Pale of Settlement, a fact confirmed by a government study. Nobody disputed the facts, but it didn't change the widespread belief about the Jews and their negative influence. Again, let me not confuse anybody with facts. The anti-Semitism of Russia is not new, and in ordinary times it might have blown over. However, an unexpected event on March 1st in 1881 changes everything. And that is Alexander II is shot to death in St. Petersburg. Some Jews compared the days immediately following the assassination to living on top of a volcano. many rumors claimed that Alexander III, his son, ordered Russians to attack Jews, and that anyone who failed to do so would be punished severely. He denies the rumor, but people insisted that he really did want them to beat the Jews. They were convinced that he issued the denial, that his denial is only to quiet foreigners. The violence begins on April 15th, 1881, and quickly spreads throughout the Ukraine and much of southern Russia. On April 26, 1881, it reaches Kiev, the Ukrainian capital, and a witness describes the first day of rioting. Reading number 4. Phyllis, do you have the text? Please.
Okay. At 12 o'clock noon, the air echoed with wild shouts, whistling, jeering, hooting, and laughing. An enormous crowd of young boys, artisans, and laborers was marching. The entire street was jammed with the Barefoot Brigade. The destruction of the Jewish homes began. Window panes and doors began to fly about, and shortly thereafter, the mob, having gained access to the houses and stores, began to throw upon the streets absolutely everything that fell into their hands. Clouds of feathers began to whirl in the air. The sound of broken window panes and frames, the crying, shouting, and despair on one hand, and the terrible yelling and jeering on the other completed the picture. Shortly afterwards, the mob threw itself upon the Jewish synagogue, which, despite its strong bars, locks, and shutters, was wrecked in a moment. One should have seen the fury with which the riffraff fell upon the Torah scrolls, of which there were many in the synagogue. The scrolls were torn to shreds, trampled in the dirt, and destroyed with incredible passion.
The new word, the word of the day, launched in the 1880s, was pogrom. The term pogrom comes from the Russian word for thunder, the sound heard just after lightning strikes, signaling a storm to come. And now the word came to refer to an organized and sometimes officially encouraged massacre. In the years immediately following these pogroms, about 35,000 Jews left Russia for Palestine, but many more emigrated to North America and Western Europe. Between 1880 and 1914, more than 2 million Russian Jews left Russia and came to the United States. In the 1880s, the Jews in Russia had few ways to resist. They were a poorly armed civilian group, and they were no match for a mob supported by police battalions and an army. A few Jews decided that their best hope was to let the world know exactly what was happening. A small group of Orthodox Jews in Russia and Lithuania formed a secret society to do just that. A letter describing their experience was sent to prominent Jews in other countries, asking them to make their story well known. The letter to England was addressed to Baron Nathaniel Rothschild. He immediately turned it over to the Times of London. A reporter uses that information to write 2 articles which appeared on January 11th and January 13th in 1882. The beginning of the first article suggests the power of the story that they wanted told. Reading number 5, Marcia, do you have reading number 5?
Yes.
Please.
Men ruthlessly murdered tender married women, the prey of a brutal lust that has also caused their death, and young girls violated in the sight of their relatives by soldiers who should have been the guardians of their honor. These have been the deeds with which the population of southern Russia has been stained since last April. The article ended with a call to action by the editors of the Times. Quote, "It is the lesson taught by all experience that the only solution of the Jewish question is the granting of full equality. The Russian Jewish question may be summed up in the words, are 3.5 million of human beings to perish because they are Jews, end quote.
The article in the Times that we prompted demonstrations in support of Russian Jewry. The leader of the Catholic Church in England condemned not only the violence, but also the degrading laws that had harassed Jews throughout Europe for centuries. Prime Minister William Gladstone acknowledged the horror of the pogroms, but he nonetheless refused to send popular resolutions or even petitions signed by British Jews to the Russian government. He refused to respond to the United States request that American and British governments jointly approach the Russians. There are historians who suggest that Gladstone revealed his reasoning for remaining silent when he asked the House of Commons to avoid a public discussion of the pogroms because it was more likely to harm than to help the Jewish population. You're always balancing those two issues. He told them he would prefer to rely on private, unofficial contacts to express England's feelings. Gladstone's comments suggest that the Russian government was threatening to harm Jews further if other countries intervened. Despite Britain's resistance, however, other nations did send messages and petitions to Russia. Demonstrations took place in many countries, including the United States, France, Spain, and Italy, and the Tsar simply ignored them. Foreigners were not the only people outraged by the pogroms. There were Russians, including anti-Semites, who were deeply disturbed by what was going on because they believed that what was happening was hurting the economy. It's all about economics. On May 30th, 1881, not long after the pogroms began, one of these Russians, an important textile manufacturer in Moscow, sent a letter to the Minister of the Interior outlining some of the economic problems he was having as a result of the pogroms. He usually sold his merchandise, his cloth, to Jewish merchants in the Ukraine, but now they were unable to work and some couldn't pay their bills. If these problems continued, he and other textile manufacturers would be forced to make less cloth and there would be layoffs in Russia. He urged the government to take action. Independent observers, diplomats from Austria and Hungary confirmed the manufacturers' fears. They reported that in areas where there were pogroms, it was nearly impossible for peasants or ordinary workers to be able to borrow money. Jewish lenders refused to make loans, go figure, because they assumed they wouldn't get repaid. And as a result, the train stations in central Russia were jammed with peasants looking for work. Over the next decade, however, more and more Russians give up any hope of true reform. Some larger numbers begin to join the revolutionary groups that had little in common. The groups themselves had little in common except a strong opposition to Tsarist rule. To try to turn attention away from himself, the Tsar decides to unite the Russian people against a common enemy, ladies and gentlemen, us. Okay? 1903, his agents begin to organize new pogroms and to revive old blood libels. In May of that year, 1903, a government-supported newspaper charged that the Jews had killed a Christian child so that they could use his blood in the matzahs that they were baking for Passover. A government-backed patriotic society known as the Black Hundreds took to the streets to demand justice. However, the revolutionary groups in Russia were quick to point out that this pogrom had been planned by the government start to finish. The New York Times confirmed those claims. Reading number 6. Lisa, do you have reading number 6?
Yes. The anti-Jewish riots in Kishinev are worse than the censor will permit to publish. There was a well laid out plan for the general massacre of Jews on the day following the Russian Easter. The mob was led by priests, and the general cry, "Kill the Jews," was taken up all over the city. The dead number 120, and the injured about 500. Babes were literally torn to pieces by the frenzied and bloodthirsty mob. The local police made no attempt to halt the reign of terror. At sunset, the streets were piled with corpses and wounded. Those who could make their escape fled in terror, and the city is now practically deserted of Jews.
Okay. In the end, however, even these pogroms, all of this disaster that's going on could not stop change from happening in Russia. 1905, after a disastrous defeat in a war with Japan, the Tsar is forced to make changes that reduce his power. In February, he agrees to organize an advisory council or a Duma. I don't know if I'm saying that with the right accent. I went right to the Hebrew. It's a Duma. It could be a Duma, I'm not sure. All right. As soon as the country won its freedom from Turkey in the early 19th century, anti-Jewish restrictions go into force. I'm sorry, I've jumped ahead. I'm sorry. They tried desperately to unsuccessfully deprive Jews of the right to vote on the grounds that they're not full citizens. All right. Once again, the government organizes massive demonstrations to protest any kind of change. These demonstrations quickly turned into riots directed against the Jews. An investigation by the Duma later reveals that the leaflets that were used to urge the violence were printed at a police headquarters and financed by the Tsar himself. The uprising ends in 1907, and the Tsar remains in control. And before long, he once again turns his campaign against the Jews. And as part of that campaign, the Russian secret police create a new document, a new forgery known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. We will look next week at how the impact of that document played out in the United States. It was said to be proof that the Jews were plotting to take over the world. And like other myths about the Jews, it spread quickly to countries around the world throughout the early 1900s. All right. Let me just make sure I'm going to, I don't want to leave anything else. Just give me 1 second, make sure. Yeah, I'm jumping the right place. Okay, good. All right. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to the United States. We have the time to do that. I was worried we wouldn't, but I think we do. Ulysses S. Grant. Okay, middle 1800s. During the Civil War in America, November 9th, 1862, the following order was issued by Ulysses S. Grant's command headquarters. Sarah, do you have reading number 11?
General Orders number 11. The Jews as a class violating every regulation of trade established by the Treasury Department and also department orders are hereby expelled from the department within 24 hours from the receipt of this order. Post commanders will see that all of this class of people be furnished passes and be required to leave, and anyone returning after such notification will be arrested and held in confinement until an opportunity occurs of sending them out as prisoners, unless furnished with permits from headquarters. No passes will be given to these people to visit headquarters for the purpose of making personal applications for trade permits by order of Major General U.S. Grant.
Okay. The order goes into immediate effect. Army officers, they order Jewish traders and their families out of all the regions near the Northern Territories and Kentucky in particular. Grant may not have intended such results, all right? Nonetheless, his headquarters expresses no objection to the continued presence of Jewish settlers as opposed to cotton traders. It's a particular field that's being aimed at. But the wording of the order addresses all Jews, regardless of occupation, and it's implemented accordingly. A group of Jewish merchants from Paducah, Kentucky, led by Caesar Kaskel, Kaskel, send a telegram to President Lincoln in which they condemn the order as the grossest violation of the Constitution and our rights as citizens under it. The telegram noted that it would place us as outlaws before the world. We respectfully ask your immediate attention to this enormous outrage on all laws and humanity. Throughout the Union, Jewish groups protested and sent telegrams to government officials in Washington. The issue attracted the significant attention in Congress as well as the press. The Democrats condemned the order, Grant's order, as part of what they saw as the US government's attempt violation of civil liberties, and they introduced a motion of censure against Grant in the Senate, which attracts, it gets a 31-7 approval in the Senate. Some newspapers supporting Grant's action, the Washington Chronicle, for example, criticizes Jews as scavengers of commerce. Most, however, strongly oppose, and the New York Times denounces the order as humiliating and a revival of the spirit of medieval ages. Kaskel leads a delegation to Washington, D.C., arriving on January 3rd, 1863. After meeting with several congressmen, he goes directly to the White House. Lincoln receives the the delegation, and studies Kaskel's copies of the General Orders number 11. The president tells his general-in-chief to have Grant's order revoked, which Halleck does in the following message. A paper purporting to be General Orders number 11, issued by you, it's a letter to Grant, issued to you by you December 17th, has been presented here. By its terms, it expels all Jews from your department. If such an order has been issued, it will be immediately revoked. One of Halleck's staff officers privately explained to Grant that the problem with the order laid in its excessive scope, all right, it says, had the word peddler been inserted after the word Jew, I do not suppose any exception would have been taken to the order. According to Halleck, Lincoln had no objection to his expelling traders and Jewish peddlers, which I suppose was the object of your order, but in terms prescribing an entire religious class, some of whom are filling our ranks, the president deemed necessary to revoke it, and it is revoked on January 17th. Rabbi Isaac Meyer Weiss in Cincinnati, the leader of the early reform movement, led a delegation to meet with Lincoln to express their gratitude to him. Lincoln said he was surprised that Grant had issued such a command and said to condemn a class is to say at least to wrong the good with the bad. Lincoln said he saw no distinction between Jew and Gentile and would allow no American to be wronged because of his religious affiliation. Now, I don't want to leave it there. That's where my notes end. But I want to share with you, I listened to several lectures and have read a couple books on Grant as well. He spent most of the rest of his career, even as president, trying to dispel the sense of anti-Semitism that is portrayed by this order. His cabinet, his government had more Jews in it than any predecessor in history. He went out of his way to say, I am not an anti-Semite, and that the intent of his orders was not as it would seem on its surface. With that, I open the floor.
So what did he say the purpose was?
So some of the reading I've done, he said he had visited with I think his uncle or grandfather the day before, who was in the cotton business, who had made accusations against Jewish cotton peddlers. And so his intent was to the Jewish peddlers, the people involved in the cotton industry be expelled. Now, again, that's not as lovely as we'd like it to be, but it got expanded to the entire race. So there was a personal issue, and whether or not it was accurate, I can't tell you. But look, the reality of it is any group of people has its bums. And so I have no doubt there were some Jews who were bums. And you just use that as an excuse. You know, Jews are no less likely to be Goths than anybody else.
So I saw Romania on here. Did we?
Yeah, I just don't have the time for that, and I made the decision.
Okay, I just wanted to know if that was something separate.
No, there wasn't a lot there, and I just made the decision I had to cut something, and that's what I cut.
Kishinev is Romania.
This is an overview of the history. We're cutting things all the time.
Right. I know that a lot of our grandparents probably came in that immigration.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
I know my grandfather did, because I was told that he left to escape conscription.
Right.
And then when they went back to visit, in World War I broke out, the family went all the way through Japan to come back, and he had to sneak out of Russia because they would have conscripted him again.
Right.
It's nice actually having a positive note at the end.
Yeah. Yes.
I just wanted to add that a couple of months ago in the Chronicle, there was a really interesting editorial comparing, I believe I can't think of his name, I think it was Alexander Vindeman, to Dreyfus, to the Dreyfus affair. Vindeman being the one who came out against one of the accusations. And you know, the Dreyfus affair is really contemporary in its scope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a response to nationalism. It's a response to an industrial revolution. It's part of the world as we know it, as opposed to the events prior to that time. Yeah.
Mark, one of the things that strikes me is that you look at Jews in the post-Enlightenment, where most Jews or many Jews don't identify as Jews from a religious perspective. Like Hugh talks about what, 30-40% say we're Jews culturally. And Dreyfus likewise. Dreyfus and Herzl both were not dedicated to Judaism as a religion, which is why he came up with a let's call it a nationalist solution, and creating a nation state, a la the nation states of Europe.
Yeah, for sure. Herzl talks about he doesn't dream of a state of Judaism. He dreams of a state where there's a cafe you can sit and read safely. All right. And if you, Gail, take your comment just a second. If you look at exactly what you just said, you look at the Israeli Declaration of Independence, it really calls for 4 Israels, 4 different perspectives on it, because they realize there's a religious perspective, there's a secular perspective, there's a concept of Jewish culture. It's all over the place. And somehow everybody, because they only get one land, had to figure out a way to live together. Yeah. Gail?
Yeah, I read somewhere that prior to Herzl's nationalism solution, that he pondered as a result of, rising anti-Semitism in the East, conversion to Christianity. Have you read that?
Yeah, I'm sure. Look, whether or not it's written, I'm sure that was part of the thinking of many of the people of the time. It wouldn't surprise me. I haven't read it, but that would not surprise me. How do we fit into the society and live comfortably? And I think that the Dreyfus affair convinced him that it simply wasn't going to happen.
Right.
Yeah. So originally on the schedule, there's no class next week, but we are going to have class. We've had too many breaks. I think I only listed 2 more lessons. I think I've got a third, so we may be able to go 3 more weeks. I need to take a look through my notes just to verify that. But we are going to have class next Sunday. Also, we had a bar mitzvah workshop that online. We usually have 3 of them, and because it was online, we did it in 2, so I have an extra week available. That's the enabler. Okay.
Thank you.
I wish everybody a warm week, blessed with lots of water and lovely showers.
Let me
too
say,
much water.
Let's hope the water
Yeah.
is what you want instead of the broken pipes.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, where you want it, right?
Yeah.
Continuous
I just
energy.
want to go home.
Yeah, water where you want it. That would be a good thing.
Yeah.
Please God. And a happy Purim, everybody. We'll see you
Happy
hopefully
Purim.
Thursday evening, Friday morning.
And
Choose
Tuesday,
joy.
Tuesday at
Ah,
noon. Don't
yes,
forget.
Zoom at
Yeah,
noon.
so Tuesday at noon, I'm doing a lesson on a modern look of the text of Purim, of Esther, including some of the literary analysis of the text. I've been doing some research and it's been a lot of fun. So
Awesome.
join me Tuesday at noon, and then Thursday I repeat this class as well. All
Thanks,
right.
Sameach, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.
Mark.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.